Hello, my name is Ish and I'm an iOS developer. Today I'm going to talk about functions in Swift. This talk is aimed at folks who are new to Swift, but hopefully it's still useful if you're a Swift veteran. Swift is a strongly typed language. That means all variables and constants have a specific type. We can make countless custom types in Swift, but at its core, Swift has 6 fundamental types, meaning every other type in Swift is based on one or more of these. So ints, doubles, strings, bools, and even collections like arrays and dictionaries are all structs. Optionals are fundamentally enums with 2 cases. As I mentioned, there are 6 fundamental types. However, only one of them performs actions. Enums, structs, protocols, and tuples are like nouns. They are something. Functions, however, do something. I'm going to discuss 3 topics related to functions in Swift. The first topic is function type, which describes what you promise to give the function as input and what it promises to return. The next topic is implementation. This is explicitly explaining what the function should do and how. The third and final topic is referred to as calling the function. This is sometimes also referred to as running, and at other times as executing. Calling, running, and executing in this context all mean the same thing. I'll refer to it as calling. Let's begin with type. Function types have 3 parts. The first part is a list of 0 or more parameters. Parameters are the inputs to the function. It's the data that will be provided when the function is called. I'll show an example of this later. The second part is an arrow written with a dash and an angle bracket. This arrow points to the return type of the function. The third and final part of the function type is the return type. This will either be a single type or nothing, because not all functions return data. We'll talk about returning and what that means in just a bit. As I mentioned, function types can have multiple parameters. Each parameter is separated by a comma. A function may also have no parameters. This is one way to refer to a function that has no parameters and returns nothing. Here we have a function type that accepts a string and returns an int. We have a list of 0 or more data types for the parameters. We have an arrow. And we have a single return type. Here we have 2 parameters, string and double, with a return type of bool. This function type accepts a chicken and returns an egg. And yes, if chicken and egg are defined as types, then this would be a valid function type. Okay, that was function types. Now let's look at implementation. This is an implementation of a function called sayHello. We start implementations by writing func. This indicates that what follows will be the declaration of a function. Then we give the function a name. It's a good practice to name a function based on what it does. After the name, we write the function type, which we learned earlier is what sort of data the function will accept and what type it will return. Something that's a bit different here is that each parameter will have a parameter label. This label is the name of a constant that will be assigned the value of a parameter when the function is called. Then we write the curly braces. Between the curly braces is where the magic happens. It's also a new scope. Any variables or constants created within the curly braces are only relevant between the curly braces. What happens in curly braces stays in curly braces, unless you return. Finally, we write the code for the body of the function between the curly braces. Often we will reference the parameters that were passed in. So here's our function implementation. Though, notice that this function return type is void, which means it doesn't return anything. If a function returns void, then we don't have to write the return type. You'll normally see void functions written this way. The important thing to remember here is that even though it isn't explicitly written, the return type is void. That was implementation. The final topic is calling functions. How does that work? Well, like many things with functions, there are three parts. The first part is writing the name of the function. Then we write a pair of open and closed parentheses. This tells a function to start running. The third and final bit is to make sure that any parameters that the function requires are included in the parentheses along with the matching label. The label used when calling a function is called an argument label. The label you use when calling the function must match the label used when the function was implemented. So this is what it looks like to call the function that we implemented earlier. Here's another implementation of a function. This function is called triple. It accepts a single parameter that is an int called number, and it returns an int. In the body of the function between the curly braces, the number that's passed in is multiplied by 3 and then returned. If we intend to call our function but do not include parentheses, it won't do anything. And if we were to assign it to a variable or a constant, we would see that the data type of this function is one that accepts an int and returns an int. In order to call the function, we have to write the name and the parentheses and any parameters that the function requires. Now when you call the function, it will return the result. In this case, the result would be 7 times 3, which is 21. The value 21 would then be assigned to x. Here's our say hello function again. When we call it, we write say hello name ish. That's kind of clunky. I'd rather call it saying say hello to ish. Swift allows us to have one label used when calling a function and a different one to be referenced inside the body of a function. Here, our argument label is 2. The parameter label is name. Notice the code in the body of the function uses the name of the parameter label. We could have just changed the parameter to 2, but then hello name makes a whole lot more sense than hello 2. Arguments allow us to have the best of both worlds. Now we call the function by writing say hello to ish, which is a lot more natural than say hello name ish. Let's take another look at our triple function. When I call triple, I really don't want to use a label at all. Here's how we do that. We add an underscore before the parameter label. This means that when the function is called, an argument label won't have to be used at all. So now we can call triple just by writing triple and an integer between the parentheses with no label. And again, our function returns 21. Now let's talk about default values. We're going to add another parameter to our sayHello function. This parameter will be a string, and it will represent a city. Now we'll change the body of our function to use this new parameter. Notice the parameter name is city, but I also gave it an argument label of n. Now when we call the function, we need to add the new argument, and it reads nicely as sayHello to ish in LA. When we call the function, the console output will be hello ish, welcome to LA. Something else we can do here is add a default value to a parameter. Here, I've added a default value for the city parameter. This doesn't change the body of the function between the curly braces. But now when we call the function, we no longer need to add the second argument. Only arguments that don't have a default value are required when calling a function. Calling the function with only one parameter still yields the same console output. If the default value isn't what you want, though, you can always explicitly specify a value for the parameter, and that value will be used instead. Now the console output would read, hello ish, welcome to NYC. There's actually a bit more to functions, but if you're new to Swift, and especially if you're new to programming, this should get you started. I hope it was helpful. If you want to reach out, you can find me on Twitter. I'm at iShabazz.